She thought it was just a first date, one evening, one chance to get to know someone new, a night filled with laughter, conversation, and the excitement of possibility. But for 19-year-old sod Carly Robinson, that date would be her last. She would never make it home. Days later, her remains were discovered, brutally dismembered, and discarded, leaving a community in shock and a family shattered. Sod was young, full of life, and had her whole future ahead of her. She had dreams, ambitions, and people who loved her. She wasn't meeting up with a stranger in a dark alley. She was on a date, something millions of people do every day without a second thought. But this night was different. Something went wrong somewhere between her first hello and her final goodbye. What could have happened? What turned a simple night out into a horrifying crime scene? And who was the man she met that night, Maxwell Anderson? As we unravel this chilling case's details, disturbing truths emerge. The kind of truths that make you question how well you know someone. Stay with us as we break down the events leading to Sada's tragic fate and reveal the shocking facts no one saw coming. In April 2024, 19-year-old Sod Carly Robinson had no reason to believe that meeting someone new would end in tragedy. She was young, full of life, and had her whole future ahead of her. Like many people her age, she was exploring the world of dating, stepping into adulthood with the hope of forming new connections. But the person she met that night, 33-year-old Maxwell Anderson, wasn't just a stranger. He was someone with secrets, secrets that would change everything. Sod was a college student, balancing academics, friendships, and future dreams. She was loved by her family and had people who cared deeply about her. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't putting herself in obvious danger. She was going on a date, something millions of people do daily. Yet, just hours after she stepped out that evening, she disappeared. In today's world, meeting new people has never been easier. Dating apps, social media, and online connections allow strangers to form relationships with just a few taps on a screen. But with that convenience comes risk. You never genuinely know who you're meeting. You never know what's happening behind a friendly smile or a casual conversation. For young women, the dangers of trusting the wrong person can be devastating. Sada's story is not just about one tragic night, it's about a growing concern that haunts modern dating. How do you know if the person you're meeting is safe? How can you tell if someone is hiding something dangerous? Her case is a chilling reminder that what seems like an ordinary interaction can take a horrifying turn instantly. As we piece together what happened that night, the details paint a heartbreaking picture. A young woman, simply looking for companionship, walked into a nightmare. The man she met had a past no one saw coming. The choices he made led to an outcome that would leave a family in mourning, a community in shock, and a world questioning how something like this could happen to someone so full of life. Sod Carly Robinson was 19 years old, young, full of life, and on the path to building a bright future. She grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, surrounded by family and friends who adored her. To those who knew her, Sod wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was kind-hearted and determined and had a presence that could light up a room. She had dreams, ambitions, and a profound responsibility toward her future. She was in her final semester at Milwaukee Area Technical College, working hard toward an Associate of Arts degree in criminal justice. She had plans. She wasn't someone just drifting through life, she had a goal and was taking steps to achieve it. Beyond school, Sod worked at Pizza Shuttle, a local restaurant where she was known for her strong work ethic and warm personality. Co-workers and friends described her as someone who always put in the effort, whether in her job, school, or relationships. But Sod wasn't just about academics and work, she had passions that made her unique. She loved the color pink, a small detail that became a heartbreaking symbol of remembrance after her passing. Her interests, style, and how she carried herself made her stand out to the people around her. She was young and social, and, like many people her age, she was exploring the world of dating, looking to make new connections. Friends described her as trusting but cautious. She was not reckless, didn't take unnecessary risks, and wasn't the type to put herself in obvious danger. So when she agreed to meet someone new for a date, she likely felt comfortable, unaware of the nightmare ahead. But Saad would never return home. The young woman with so much potential and love to give would never get the chance to fulfill the dreams she worked so hard for. Maxwell S. Anderson was 33, over a decade older than Saad. But unlike her, his life had taken a much darker path. He wasn't known for kindness or ambition. His name didn't come up in conversations about bright futures. Instead, his past was riddled with warning signs, signs that, in hindsight, paint a profoundly unsettling picture. Anderson had a history of run-ins with the law. Between 2014 and 2019, he faced multiple charges, including disorderly conduct, criminal damage to property, and intimidating a witness. In 2015, he was found guilty of domestic abuse, a charge that should have been a clear indication of the kind of person he was. He had a pattern of violent behavior, yet he was still walking free, able to continue his life as if nothing had happened. In 2019, he was convicted of his second offense for operating while intoxicated. This suggested more than just reckless behavior, it pointed to deeper issues, possible struggles with substance abuse, and a disregard for consequences. His most recent charge, in 2022, was for driving with a suspended license. It seemed minor compared to his previous crimes, but it was another piece of evidence that Maxwell Anderson had no respect for rules, laws, or boundaries. Despite this troubling past, few people around him seemed to suspect the extent of his dangerous tendencies. Was he someone who hid his true nature well? Or were there warning signs that people overlooked? When Saad met Maxwell, she likely had no idea who she was dealing with. She couldn't have known about his history of violence, his criminal record, or the choices that made him the man he was. She only saw what he chose to show her, a man who seemed normal enough to go on a date with. But for Maxwell Anderson, this wasn't just a date. It was something else entirely. And it would end in a way no one could have imagined. April 1, 2024, was supposed to be just another evening. Saad Carly Robinson, a 19-year-old college student with a bright future, had made plans to go out for the night. She was meeting someone new, 33-year-old Maxwell Anderson. It was a first date, nothing out of the ordinary. People meet new individuals all the time. Friends, coworkers, and classmates all take that step, believing they are making a connection. That's precisely what Saad thought she was doing. She and Anderson arrived at the Twisted Fisherman, a seafood restaurant in Milwaukee's Menominee Valley. The atmosphere was lively and casual, people laughing over drinks, conversations blending into the hum of the city nightlife. Surveillance footage captured the two of them sitting at the bar. To anyone watching, it would seem like a typical night out. Two people talking, sharing a meal, getting to know each other. But Saad had no idea she was sitting next to a man who had been planning something far more disturbing than a simple dinner. As the evening continued, there was no immediate sign that something was wrong. Witnesses at the restaurant didn't report anything alarming. No arguments, no distress. But no one could see what was going through Maxwell Anderson's mind. Because, as investigators would later reveal, this wasn't just a date for him. It was something else entirely. At some point, the two of them left together. It is unclear where exactly they went after that. What is clear, though, is that Saad was never seen alive again. The following day, Saad was expected to be at work. She had a shift at Pizza Shuttle, where she was known for her dedication and reliability. But that morning, she never showed up. Her absence was immediately concerning. She wasn't the type to miss work without a reason, and she wasn't answering calls or messages. Family and friends reached out, hoping for a simple explanation. Maybe she had overslept, maybe her phone had died. But as the hours stretched on, concern turned to fear. Saada's family wasted no time. They reported her missing, urging authorities to act quickly. They knew something was wrong. She wouldn't just disappear without a trace. Then, on April 3rd, the worst possible news arrived. That morning, a severed human leg was discovered at Warnemont Park in Cudahy, a quiet area just south of Milwaukee. The discovery sent immediate shockwaves through the community. Investigators arrived, cordoning off the area, working against time to determine whose remains had been found. When DNA results came back, the confirmation was devastating. The remains belonged to Saud Carly Robinson. The news hit her loved ones like a crushing wave. Saud wasn't just missing, something unthinkable had happened to her. And soon, the pieces of a much more disturbing story began to emerge. As detectives worked tirelessly to track Saud's final movements, their focus shifted to the man she had spent her last known night with, Maxwell Anderson. What they uncovered about him was deeply unsettling. A confidential informant came forward with chilling information. According to this source, Anderson discussed plans to do something horrific. He allegedly showed the informant his basement, where plastic tarps lined the walls, ceiling, and floor. He told them he planned to lure a woman there under pretenses, claiming he wanted to show her something. Then, according to the informant, he intended to restrain her, use a gun to intimidate her, and ultimately dispose of her body by scattering the remains across different locations. It wasn't just a crime of impulse. It was planned. It was methodical. And now, it was real. Authorities wasted no time. They executed a search warrant at Anderson's home, and what they found raised even more questions. Blood was discovered on the walls and in the basement, suggesting that something violent had happened there. However, initial DNA testing didn't immediately link the blood to Saud. Was it hers? Or was there more to Anderson's story than anyone realized? Further investigation revealed even more disturbing details. Anderson had a criminal history, one that included domestic violence, intimidation, and reckless behavior. Yet, despite multiple convictions, he was free to live without serious consequences. And now, an innocent young woman is gone. With mounting evidence against him, Maxwell Anderson was arrested and charged with first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, and arson. When confronted with the charges, he pleaded not guilty. But for Saud's family, no plea, no courtroom statement could change what had already happened. Their daughter, their sister, their friend, she was gone. As the case heads to trial, there are still unanswered questions. How much of the crime was premeditated? Were there warning signs that people had missed? And most of all, why? Why did this happen to Saud? Her story is a painful reminder of the dangers that can hide behind ordinary moments. For most, a first date, a casual conversation, or a night out are harmless experiences. But for Saud, they were the beginning of something no one could have imagined. The morning of April 3, 2024, started like any other for a resident walking through Warnemont Park in Cudahy, Wisconsin. The peaceful surroundings of the lakefront park, often a place for quiet reflection and morning jogs, were shattered by a disturbing sight. Near the bluff, partially concealed in the brush, lay a severed human leg. It was a sight no one was prepared for. The call to 911 was placed immediately, and within minutes, officers from the Cudahy Police Department arrived at the scene. What they found left little doubt: this was no accident, no simple case of remains being found by chance. The leg had been deliberately placed there, severed with precision. Someone had gone to great lengths to conceal what had happened. For investigators, the priority was clear: identify the victim and piece together how the remains ended up in such a gruesome state. DNA testing was expedited, and by the following day, the results came in. The victim was 19-year-old Saud Carly Robinson, who had been reported missing just a day earlier. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. A young woman, just beginning her adult life, had vanished, and now, only a part of her had been found. But where was the rest of her? What happened to her in the hours after she was last seen? Detectives knew that time was critical. If they didn't act quickly, crucial evidence could be lost. They retraced Sada's final known movements, reviewing security footage from the Twisted Fisherman, where she had been seen having dinner with a man later identified as Maxwell Anderson. That footage became their first significant lead. Maxwell Anderson wasn't just a random person in Sada's life, he was the last to have seen her alive. That alone made him a person of interest. But as investigators looked deeper into his past, what they found raised even more concerns. A confidential informant came forward, explaining Anderson's alleged plans. According to the informant, Anderson had spoken in detail about wanting to lure a woman to his basement. He allegedly showed them the space, lined with plastic tarps and saws placed in a way that suggested preparation rather than storage. Anderson reportedly described how he wanted to restrain his victim, use a firearm to control her, and then dispose of her in pieces. It was horrifying to hear, but what was worse was the realization that this wasn't just talk. Saad was gone. And a part of her had already been found in a park. Investigators wasted no time obtaining a search warrant for Anderson's home. What they found inside only deepened the growing nightmare. Bloodstains were visible on the basement walls. Women's clothing, tucked away where it didn't belong. The scent of bleach lingered in the air, an attempt, perhaps a rushed one, to erase the evidence of what had happened. But cleaning up wouldn't be enough to hide the truth. Another break in the case came from additional surveillance footage. Video evidence showed Anderson near the location where Sada's burned-out car was later discovered. Investigators believe he had set fire to the vehicle to destroy any evidence inside. But he had underestimated how much the authorities could still uncover. With mounting evidence against him, authorities moved swiftly. On April 4, 2024, Maxwell Anderson was taken into custody. The charges were severe: first-degree intentional homicide, mutilation of a corpse, and arson. The weight of the accusations left no room for doubt. Sada's death had been no accident. It had been planned. When confronted with the evidence, Anderson refused to take responsibility. He pleaded not guilty, which infuriated Sada's family and the community. How could he deny what seemed so obvious? How could he ignore the grief of a family who had lost their daughter in such an unimaginable way? As the legal process began, delays and procedural motions prolonged the case. Initially set for December 2024, Anderson's trial was postponed until May 2025. The defense requested more time to review the evidence and consult with experts. For Sada's family, each delay was agonizing. They wanted justice, answers, and, above all, to ensure that no other family would ever endure what they were going through. Now, as the trial date approaches, the world is watching. Will Anderson finally be held accountable for what happened to Saad Carly Robinson? Will her family get the justice they so desperately seek? One thing is sure, her story will not be forgotten. What drives a person to commit such an act? What kind of mind not only takes life but does so with such brutal precision, planning every detail? These are the questions investigators and the public have grappled with since the arrest of Maxwell Anderson. At 33 years old, Anderson was not someone who had been widely known for violent behavior, at least, not publicly. But the more authorities dug into his past, the more they uncovered disturbing details that painted a picture of a man with a dangerous mind. A confidential informant would later tell investigators that Anderson had been planning this for weeks, possibly even longer. He allegedly spoke about his desire to lure a woman to his home, trap her in his basement, and kill her. This wasn't something that happened in the heat of the moment. It was something he had thought about. Something he had prepared for. Anderson reportedly showed the informant his basement, a place where he had taken deliberate steps to create an environment designed for something horrific. Plastic tarps lined the walls. Tools, specifically saws, were arranged in a way that suggested they weren't just being stored. They were ready to be used. He had thought through every step, how he would control his victim, how he would keep her from escaping, and how he would dispose of the body. These actions point towards something beyond mere violence. They suggest a need for control, a complete lack of empathy, and a deeply disturbed mind that found some form of gratification in what he was about to do. While details about his mental health history remain largely unknown, the crime itself raises alarming psychological concerns. The level of premeditation, the calculated nature of the attack, and the way he attempted to cover his tracks all indicate traits often associated with psychopathy or severe antisocial personality disorder. But what made Anderson act now? Had he been waiting for the right moment? Or had something triggered his decision to finally follow through? The evidence leaves little room for doubt. This was planned. Every detail points to a crime thought out long before Saad Robinson ever met Anderson. Investigators learned that Anderson had allegedly told the informant exactly how he wanted to carry out the crime. He described using a firearm to gain control over his victim, how he tried to kill her, and how he intended to dispose of her body. These weren't vague statements. They were detailed, step-by-step descriptions. The way his basement was prepared only reinforced this. The plastic tarps weren't placed there on a whim. They were meant to contain blood, to make cleanup easier. The tools weren't coincidentally nearby. They were there because he planned to use them. Another key piece of evidence. Surveillance footage. Investigators later found video evidence placing Anderson near the area where Saada's burned-out car was discovered. This suggested that, after the murder, he tried to destroy evidence, another clear indication that he knew exactly what he was doing. The question, then, is not whether this was planned. The question is, why? Understanding Anderson's motive is complex because what kind of reason could explain something so horrific? Still, investigators and psychologists have attempted to piece together possible explanations. Anderson's alleged statements about his plans suggest a need to dominate his victim completely. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about personal conflict. It was about control. By luring Saad into his home, keeping her in his basement, and deciding her fate, Anderson may have acted out a fantasy in his mind for some time. The preparation of the crime scene suggests a level of anticipation. How Anderson allegedly described his plans to the informant indicates that he wasn't just thinking about the act, he was looking forward to it. This raises the possibility that he derived some psychological or even sadistic satisfaction from the idea of committing the crime. While there are no widely reported cases of Anderson committing prior violent crimes, it's rare for someone to escalate to this level of brutality without some history. Whether it was unreported incidents, violent fantasies, or behaviors that people around him ignored, investigators have questioned whether this was indeed his first act of violence, or just the first one that was uncovered. Some criminals don't start with murder. They start with more minor acts, controlling behavior, stalking, manipulative tendencies, before progressing to more dangerous actions. Did Anderson have previous incidents that went unnoticed? Had he tried to lure other women before Saad? Was this crime the result of years of suppressed violent urges finally being acted upon? What makes this case even more unsettling is that Anderson, upon his arrest, pleaded not guilty. He did not confess. He did not take responsibility. Instead, he chose to fight the charges, leaving Saada's family to relive their pain as they waited for justice. While investigators may never truly understand what went through Anderson's mind the night he took Saada's life, one thing is clear: this was not an accident. This was not a random moment of rage. This was something planned, something he was ready to carry out. Tragically, Saad Robinson became his victim. Some crimes are horrifying not just because of what happened but because of the details that emerge afterward, the things no one saw coming, the moments where someone might have been able to stop it, and the chilling behaviors that went unnoticed. As investigators dug deeper into the murder of Saad Robinson, they uncovered facts that made an already devastating crime even more unsettling. The case seemed straightforward: a young woman meets a man for a date, and she's gone by the night's end. The evidence against Maxwell Anderson was strong: the public was outraged, and authorities appeared to be closing in on a swift conviction. But then, something unexpected happened that raised more questions than answers. When forensic teams examined Anderson's home, they found traces of blood in his basement. This discovery was crucial because, according to investigators, it was clear that Saad had suffered a violent attack there. However, the results were shocking when the samples were sent for DNA testing. The blood did not match Saad Robinson. This revelation changed everything. If the blood wasn't Saad's, whose was it? Did Anderson have another victim, someone authorities had never identified? Was there a crime gone undetected, a missing person no one had connected to him? This wasn't just a minor setback in the investigation. It was a disturbing possibility that investigators had to consider. Was Saad Robinson indeed his first victim, or was she just the first one they found? Adding another layer of controversy, plans for a county-sponsored memorial in Saad's honor were abruptly cancelled, not because of logistical issues, but because of a flood of racist emails. Some community members objected to taxpayer funds being used for a tribute to a young black woman who had been brutally murdered. The hateful messages were so overwhelming that officials decided to halt the memorial plans altogether, leaving Saad's loved ones to grieve without the public recognition they had hoped for. As more details emerged about Maxwell Anderson, it became clear that this was not a random act of violence. It was something planned that had been in his mind for weeks, maybe even longer. A confidential informant came forward with chilling information. Anderson had discussed this crime before meeting Saad. He had allegedly described, in detail, exactly how he wanted to carry out a murder. According to court documents, Anderson even showed the informant his basement, pointing out his preparations. The walls were lined with plastic tarps, and tools, including saws, were arranged in a way that suggested they were meant for something specific, something calculated. The most disturbing part? He was proud of it. He told the informant that he wanted to lure a woman to his home, trap her in his basement, and kill her. He explained how he would use a firearm to keep her under control, how he would carry out the attack, and how he would dispose of the body. It wasn't a vague fantasy, it was a plan. Yet, despite these horrifying statements, no one reported him. No one called the police. If someone had, could Saad Robinson still be alive today? In the days leading up to her murder, Saad likely had no idea that the man she was about to meet had been thinking about killing someone long before she entered his life. She had no idea that he had made preparations, that he had told someone what he intended to do, that his basement had already been transformed into a crime scene before she arrived. Anderson's internet activity was another unsettling piece of the puzzle. Investigators found that he had searched for ways to dispose of a body, among other incriminating topics. These weren't casual searches, they were instructional. They were research. Even after Saad's murder, Anderson showed little sign of remorse. He attempted to cover his tracks, allegedly setting Saad's car on fire to destroy evidence. Surveillance footage placed him near the area where her burned-out vehicle was found, making it clear that he was methodically trying to erase any connection to the crime. But it wasn't enough. The truth came out. And when it did, it revealed not just the horrifying fate of Saad Robinson but also the terrifying reality that Anderson had been planning something like this for a long time. As the case progressed, one question lingered: had someone spoken up earlier and taken his words seriously? Could this have been prevented? Would Saad still be alive? We may never know. But one thing is sure, this wasn't a crime of passion, nor a moment of lost control. This was something far worse, a murder that had been waiting to happen. The legal battle following Saad Robinson's tragic murder was not just about punishing Maxwell Anderson, it was about justice, closure, and the hope that no other family would endure such heartbreak. But the road to justice was not swift. It was filled with delays, painful courtroom moments, and a family left to pick up the pieces of a life taken far too soon. From the moment Maxwell Anderson was arrested, the public demanded answers. The evidence against him was overwhelming: surveillance footage, cell phone data, and forensic evidence tied him to Saad's murder. He was charged with first-degree intentional homicide, mutilation of a corpse, and arson, each charge reflecting the brutality of his actions. Yet, despite the weight of the case, the trial did not begin immediately. The legal system moved slowly, with delays that tested the patience of Sada's grieving family. Initially set for December 2024, the trial was postponed to May 27, 2025. The defense requested more time to analyze Anderson's phone records, arguing that they needed a complete picture of the events leading up to the crime. For Sada's loved ones, this delay was unbearable. Every extra day in court felt like an extension of their suffering, a cruel reminder that justice was still out of reach. Her mother, Sheena Scarborough, expressed her frustration openly, calling the delay a slap in the face. She felt the system was failing them, allowing Anderson time to strategize while her family struggled to move forward. Throughout the hearings, Anderson remained emotionless. He pleaded not guilty, forcing the prosecution to prepare for a drawn-out legal battle. But the evidence was stacked against him. Surveillance footage placed him near Sada's burned-out car. DNA evidence linked him to the crime. His internet history painted a chilling picture of premeditation. The courtroom was tense, filled with people who wanted justice for Saad. When the prosecution presented the horrifying details of the crime, some family members had to leave. It was too much, too painful, to hear the way Saad was taken from them. But perhaps the most agonizing part of the trial was that Anderson refused to say where Sada's remaining body parts were. The prosecution believed that he dismembered her, but without a full recovery of her remains, her family was left with an unbearable burden. They couldn't lay her to rest completely. In a desperate plea, Sada's mother publicly reached out to Anderson's parents, begging them to convince their son to reveal what he had done with the rest of her daughter's body. Her voice was filled with raw emotion as she asked, "Please, if you know anything, tell us. Let us bring her home." But there was no response. No confession. No closure. For Sada's family, the pain didn't end in the courtroom. Every hearing, every news headline, every mention of Maxwell Anderson kept their wounds open. Yet, amid their grief, they fought to honor her memory. Saad had been a dedicated student at Milwaukee Area Technical College, working hard toward her dreams. In recognition of her efforts, the school awarded her a posthumous honorary degree, a heartbreaking and beautiful moment. Her mother, clutching the diploma that Saad would never get to hold, spoke through tears. She worked so hard for this. She deserved to be here today. She deserved a future. But even in death, Saad faced injustice. Plans for a county-sponsored memorial in her honor were abruptly cancelled, not because of lack of support, but because of a flood of racist emails. Officials had wanted to honor her life with a public tribute, but some members of the community objected to taxpayer funds being used for a black woman's memorial. The hate-filled messages were so overwhelming that officials scrapped the plans entirely, leaving Sada's loved ones to mourn in private. It was another cruel reality. Even in death, she was being disrespected. Her mother was devastated but not surprised. Although she had always known the world could be unkind, she never expected this level of cruelty. They don't see her as a person. They don't see her as someone who matters. But she did. She mattered. Saad Robinson's story is not just about one tragic night, it's about the dangers of trust, the risks of meeting strangers, and the harsh reality that not all monsters look like monsters. Her case sent shockwaves through the community, sparking urgent conversations about dating safety. In a world where online dating and meeting new people have become the norm, her story was a reminder that precautions matter. Experts weighed in, emphasizing key safety measures. Always tell someone where you're going and who you're meeting. Meet in public places with cameras and other people around. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, leave. Be cautious about red flags, controlling behavior, or manipulative tactics. But Sada's murder also exposed deeper, systemic issues. The racism that prevented her memorial, the delays in the legal system, and the fact that Anderson's disturbing behavior had gone unnoticed for so long, all of it pointed to problems that went beyond one single case. This wasn't just about Saad. This was about the countless other women who had been harmed, ignored, or failed by the system. Saada's family now fights to make sure her death means something. They want the world to remember her, not just as a victim, but as a person. She was a daughter. A student. A friend. She had dreams, plans, and a life ahead of her. And in the end, justice for Saad isn't just about one conviction, it's about ensuring no one else ends up in her place. The story of Saad Carly Robinson should never have been told, not like this. She should still be here, laughing with her friends, finishing school, and building a future filled with the dreams for which she had worked so hard. Instead, her name is now attached to tragedy. Her memory was forever tied to an act of violence so brutal that it sent shockwaves through her community. It started as an ordinary evening, just a first date, something countless people do every day without thinking twice. But for Saad, this night would be different. The person sitting across from her wasn't who he seemed. She didn't know her life would be measured in minutes of meeting him. Her family will never hear her voice again. They will never see her walk through the front door or listen to her call to say she's okay. Instead, they are left with memories, photos, old messages, and the sound of her laughter captured in videos that now feel like artifacts of a life taken too soon. Her mother, Sheena Scarborough, has spoken about the agony of losing her daughter in such a violent way. The unanswered questions, the frustration of knowing that parts of Saada's remains were never returned. She has been forced to fight for something no mother should ever have to, the right to bring her daughter home in full. And yet, justice, even in its most complete form, can never undo what happened. There is no sentence, no punishment, and no legal outcome that can replace a life stolen. Even if Maxwell Anderson is convicted, he will wake up each morning. He will still have time. Time that Saad no longer has. Saada's story is more than just another crime statistic. It is a warning, a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking behind a friendly smile, an innocent conversation, a simple first date. How often do we trust strangers? How usually do we meet someone new, give them the benefit of the doubt, and believe that people are who they say they are? The world has changed, and so has the way we meet people. Dating apps, social media, and even chance encounters put us in situations where we trust before we truly know. Saada's story is proof that this trust can be deadly. This case isn't just about one night, it's about all the moments that led to it. The warnings that might have been missed. The choices that felt safe until they weren't. If anything good can come from this tragedy, it is awareness. Awareness that no one is invincible. That every decision matters. And that we must always listen to our instincts. Saad was a daughter, a friend, and a young woman with dreams. She deserved better. Saada's life was stolen. But her story will not be forgotten. What do you think was the real motive behind this crime? Was it a moment of uncontrollable rage, or was there something deeper, something premeditated? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this case compelling and want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the truth behind the headlines, subscribe and turn on notifications. We tell real stories about victims because their voices deserve to be heard. Next week, we will bring you another shocking case that remains unsolved. It's one where the killer is still out there, walking free. Don't miss it.